Right.
Okay, welcome to tutorial 3, Education and Ethics students. I'm going to be running through some assignments, information, and some of the general points in the tutorial. Okay, as you can see, I'm going to put on, so the first thing is the assignment 2, the multiple choice quiz. There's not much to go through on that because you entered that. There were a few people who struggled to do it, and you will have got some messages on Funda telling you that if your stuff didn't save, I've given you another chance this week, so please make sure that you do that as quickly as possible. And those, I explained on Funda, those who didn't actually do it, you have to get naught, but if you attempt it this week, whatever you get, I will keep it on the back burner, and you might be at the end of the course on a borderline, and we'll take that into consideration. But those who got a 0 score, it means you did actually try the test, and somehow you didn't manage to save it. Okay, very importantly, the discussion forum. That is the main assignment for Unit 3. So I'm just going to go through some stuff with you just to look at that. Okay, this is just a reproduction of the brief for the discussion forum. You can see here, and you'll actually engage in conversation about the multicultural classroom, specifically in the South African context. And this is very important. You need to actually master the material in this TUT, in your lesson, and in the readings from Unit 3, in order to be able to contribute well and get a decent mark in the actual discussion. You can't not do this stuff and then just come and thumbsuck. And there are 3 questions in the discussion forum. Firstly, to what extent should we contextualize teaching? Secondly, how to address diversity in the classroom? And thirdly, how to deal with socioeconomic barriers to learning. And you will post those in the discussion forum, and you'll earn marks according to how well you contributed. You can see there's the rubric, and it's very clear you must do a 300-word primary contribution to each of those 3 questions. And then you must do a significant response to at least 2 other comments. And the forum will be open from next week, Monday, till Friday. So you don't just go on once, like a quiz. You actually have to go and keep going back and read through all the comments and then choose the ones that you're interested in to respond to it. And this is very important. Please note that all comments and responses must be inserted within each of the 3 conversation threads corresponding to the 3 questions. So on Funda, there will be the discussion forum, and there'll be a separate question for each of those, a separate conversation thread. And you need to go and insert all your comments only within that thread. Your original comments and your responses. It'll all be done in there. Okay, so let's look at Unit 3. And it's about culture, diversity, and socio-economic barriers. We're going to start out by just asking a question. What is the relationship between culture, socioeconomic status, and scholastic achievements? And there's no responses at the moment for this, but that is the starting point to think about this, the relationship between these issues. And as you work through the material, you should be able to think deeply about these 3 things separately: culture, socioeconomic status, and school achievement. And then you go and think deeper and think, how do these things relate? You should be able to answer that in a deeper way by the end of the unit. So we're going to firstly just look at 2 video clips and compare these video clips. The first video clip is on education in South Africa.
In 1955, members of the Anti-Apartheid African National Congress laid out their vision for South Africa. Their Freedom Charter declared that South Africa would belong to all its people, no matter what their colour. There would be work and security for everyone. Every South African would be equal before the law. The doors of learning would be flung open to all. For 50 years, apartheid education was designed to give privilege to whites. In every way, from the training of teachers to the building of schools, apartheid education entrenched inequality. But years after its demise, the education system is still in dire straits. That is in part due to the government's failure to educate young South Africans, particularly black ones. After 18 years of full democracy, South Africa is one of the most unequal countries in the world. In the World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Report, South Africa ranks 132nd out of 144 countries for its primary education, and 143rd for the quality of its science and maths. In the Department of Basic Education's National Literacy and Numeracy tests last year, only 15% of 12-year-olds scored at or above the minimum proficiency level in the language test. In maths, just 12% did. The vast majority of South African children finish primary school without being competent in reading, writing, and mathematics. The appointment in October of South Africa's president, Jacob Zuma, as a champion of education on a new United Nations education initiative was bitterly ironic. For young South Africans, success often comes down to being able to afford a better school. 3/4 of white pupils complete the final year of high school, but only 1/3 of black pupils do. Many schools suffer from poor facilities and equipment. Only 20% have libraries, and only a few of these actually have any books on the shelves. In July, textbooks that pupils should have received in January were found tossed into rivers in an effort to hide the failure to deliver them. The standard of teaching is low too. Training is inadequate. South Africa needs 25,000 new teachers a year, but only around 10,000 qualify. Maths and science teachers are in particularly short supply. Many teachers arrive late to school and leave early, spending barely half their allotted time in class. Some fail to turn up at all on Fridays. The Teachers' Union is more concerned with protecting its members, even the incompetent ones, than with training them. There is little political will when it comes to improving education, and few repercussions when those in charge perform badly. Both the ruling African National Congress and the Democratic Alliance, the official opposition which runs the Western Cape province, an area plagued by poor schools, have been criticised for failing to do enough to improve the quality of education in the province. There are economic implications too. Chronically poor education means that thousands of jobs go unfilled. Almost half of the 95,000 or so nursing jobs in the public sector are vacant, according to the South African Institute of Race Relations. Meanwhile, the official unemployment figure is about 25%. The real figure is nearer 40%. In 1994, when the ANC took over, unemployment was 20%. Unequal education creates unequal employment. The unemployment rate amongst blacks is 29%, compared with 6% for whites. More than half of young people are unemployed. Young people who fail to find work by the age of 24 will probably never have a full-time formal job. Reforming and improving the education system poses an enormous challenge for South Africa, but doing so is the only way of ensuring its future success.
Well, that was a very interesting video, and now we're going to have a look at a completely different video, and afterwards we're going to comment and invite discussion on those two.
Nice to meet you. We are really delighted to be here and to not only see the schools, but also ask you a lot of questions about, what the Finnish education system is like and how.
If you spend 3 hours or so in a school, as we did this morning, you saw real relationships and real respect between administrators and teachers. You also see really small enough class sizes so that there's a real differentiated instruction. So all the things that we say are important in terms of instruction for kids, not simply having a teacher in a classroom, not simply having a smartboard or books, the wraparound services, starting with daycare facilities and early childhood.
That preschool is really a child-centered facility.
Yes.
You see the attention paid to the experiential learning,
Yes.
and that the buildings are retrofit for kids.
Thanks to the OECD PISA data, it shows that Finland is performing better than the average. Yeah, we have been passing everybody else. What did we do to make this possible? Our policy of teachers is again very different to many other countries. First of all, we insist that every teacher in Finnish school has to have master's degree. All the Finnish teachers have to be treated like professionals. When people ask me that, how do you know in Finland that your students are learning in school? And I always say that ask the teachers, they know. Just like you ask the medical doctor if he or she thinks that the patients are doing well.
Working as a teacher in Finland, it's really something nice. And when we get the appreciation for our work, that's even better.
Teachers are appreciated in this country.
You feel it?
Yeah, I do.
Alexander? I think it's a general atmosphere that teachers are valued and the profession is appreciated in our society. And we have a good education to become a teacher.
Teachers' professionalism means something. You see it in the school, you see that it's real. But what the teachers also talked about was the pride that the community has in its teaching force. And you can see it in terms of the pride that the kids had in their teachers, as well as the confidence that the teachers had when you walked into their classrooms.
This is my main subject, psychology.
That's right. This work in two different schools. This class and the school when they are lost.
One teacher in particular was talking about a new textbook and had called the publishing company about it, and they were changing it based upon what her suggestions were. So that just blew me away, because here she was talking as if this happens every day.
20 lessons a week.
20 lessons.
Yes, but they work another 20, preparing lessons and marking papers and so on. So it's not only teaching hours. They have other duties as well.
The number of teaching hours, there's almost a 50% difference between the teachers in Finland and in the United States. What are they doing when your teachers are sweating in the classrooms? They're working on their curriculum development, they're working with parents or consulting students or so.
But if they don't have a classroom, then they can also work in here, and then they have some spaces.
This is so different than in the United States, where teachers actually have their own office space, they have their own lockers, they have computers here, they have phones here. There's a professionalism about this that you just never see for teachers in the United States.
If you go to Finnish school and say that mathematics, reading, and science are the most important subjects, they will kick you out, because this is not the way we understand learning.
You saw the integration in terms of content areas, whether it be cooking and art and music and industrial arts and calculus and literacy. And you saw the integration between technology, human interaction, and textbooks. When we talk about how there's no one-size-fits-all, you saw that clearly in the schools that we saw today.
This whole business of education is run by the educators. And that's why the communication and dialogue within this community is very different.
Really, really appreciate the time. Thank you. What is so obvious about the education system in this country is that people are engaged in problem solving, not in winning arguments. The notion that somebody is an obstacle is just irrelevant here. It's not even part of the conversation. The conversation is always about how can we all together help children. They assume that teachers should be the center of a child-centered education system, and they work to make sure that teachers have what they need to accomplish their task of educating our country.
Okay, so those were two radically different contexts and situations. So I'm going to invite you to comment on that. I'm going to go ahead and give you some of my own thoughts, but please feel free, if you're viewing, to throw in a question or a comment, and I'll immediately stop and respond to that. But in the absence of that, I'm just going to go and raise some interesting points. Firstly, I've got 2 questions about this. Okay, firstly, what is your response to these clips? And secondly, how feasible is the Finland model in South Africa? I think, personally, if I think of that first clip, it's quite shocking to think of what is happening in South Africa with our education system. And when you then go look at that Finland clip, it so accentuates it. It's kind of relative deprivation. You know, people say if you're living in a neighborhood, all you need is for someone rich to move in next door, and then suddenly you're very upset about how poor you are, if everyone in your area is poor. And so when you bring that Finland clip in juxtaposition with the South African clip, it so accentuates it. And it's what is happening in the education system in many ways. I think the right word for it is criminal. And one person said all that's needed for evil to prosper is for good people to do nothing. So I think there's a challenge for all of us as educators and for you as educators to really believe and hope that you can make a difference. I think positively, if you wanted to, just taking you personally, if you had to go over to Finland, you would really have to be amazing, get a doctoral degree, and do something incredible to make a difference. But in South Africa, you could just do a little bit, and you'd immediately have an amazing response. And I remember for some teachers who've taught in rural schools and things like that, where the conditions are difficult and it's not well paid, etc., but just the gratitude and the eagerness from those desperate children. So I think, in a sense, that's something that we must be hopeful and positive about our South African context. I remember someone from Australia came to me, and I said, "Why did you move to South Africa from Australia?" And he said it was a sense of calling. He said, "In Australia, everything works, but nothing matters." And he said, "In South Africa, nothing works, but everything matters." So I think the wrong response would be to be hopeless and pessimistic, because even though things are really negative, positively, you just have to do a little bit to have amazing change. So I think that's what we need to keep our eye on. And then I think, how feasible is the Finland model in South Africa? And that's a thing you can debate. You might say it's impossible for Finland is just a privileged country, and maybe we can trace its privilege back to colonial injustice, and we can go that whole argument. But in a sense, maybe they just have their priorities right, and there's no reason that even countries in Africa that shouldn't be aspiring to that. And there were just about 3 or 4 interesting things that you saw from that Finland video, which I think you can really learn from. Firstly, how the teachers are treated with respect. I think to the extent to which we not given respect as teachers, you know, someone said, those who can do and those who can't teach. And I think education is often seen like, well, if you didn't make it in the normal business world, you kind of can always end up as a teacher. You can always get a bursary as a teacher. You can always do that. Or many see teaching just as a mediocre stepping stone onto something better. And I think that is what happens. But in Finland, teachers are treated professionally. And I think that's maybe an ethos we need to inculcate in our own country. And you can start by seeing yourself positively, seeing your role positively that way. Another interesting thing was, if you just compare where Finland came, they were first in science and they were second in the other 2 categories. Whereas in South Africa, we were in the science like last out of 144, something like that. So that's really, really a shock. And there were actually 3 countries mentioned in this video. There was America and Finland, and then in the first video, South Africa. And it was quite interesting to see that the American person, she's the head of education of some educating body in America, and she was there and she was jealous about the excellence of Finnish education relative to American. And we would be jealous of American education. So it's all just these stages that you can see and so much to work for. Another interesting thing from that Finnish video was the teachers the amount of hours that they're actually doing contact time is half what American teachers were doing and probably what South African teachers were doing. And the thing is, the time for preparation that is counted as part of their work. And that's also something interesting possibly to fight for, to actually say preparation, and that we should be fighting for that to be recognized, that we could have quality in that. So that was all about our situation in South Africa, and it is quite shocking. we've got some more things to look at in that respect. Now we're going to go on to looking at some of the readings that are involved in Unit 3. Your first reading is from Woolcroft, sorry, chapter 6, which deals with culture and diversity. And this is quite a long chapter, and you'll find that a good overall grounding. And there's about 3 sections where there are questions which you can go through, which will stimulate your thinking. Let's just look at 2 images which are taken from that chapter. The first one is on culture. And you can see here, it looks at the issue of culture being like an iceberg. And you'll find this in Woolcroft. And what you can see is the parts of culture that you can see. Okay, I can't seem to get this any bigger, but you can actually find it in your notes. Those are the parts above the culture that you can see. Basically, your holiday customs. You'll obviously have different holidays and customs, national holidays, and things that are important. If you're Zulu compared to if you're Afrikaans, etc. Those are the obvious things. But underneath, there are a whole lot of things which are like child-rearing beliefs, your definition of insanity, your concept of personal space, and those have to do with worldview. And you'll see this ties very much in with Unit 1. So you can see how the different units tie together. And this is another little image from the Woolcroft chapter, which helps you to just analyze culture in a deeper way and look at all the different concepts. So that's just an example from the chapter of 2 very useful images and information. Let's now go look at the second reading. Okay, and it's to do with the failing standard of basic education in South Africa by Modisa Tsile. And it's quite a shocking article, which will reinforce what you saw in that video clip. Here's a quote from the article. And I'm just going to read it. The quality of education remains very poor, and the output rate has not improved. This is from a 2012 article, so it's very recent. Furthermore, classrooms are still overcrowded. The ratio of teachers to learners is 1 to 32. Now you can imagine those finished classes were very small in South African public schools. And we've got to think, that's the average. Now think of some schools where there's over 40, close to 50. The dropout rate is very high, and literacy and numeracy levels are low. Other challenges include poor teacher training, unskilled teachers, lack of commitment to teach by teachers, poor support for learners at home, and a shortage of resources in education, despite the large budgetary commitments by government. It is clear, based on the facts, that there's a need to improve the quality and functionality of education. This is where I challenge you to integrate into Unit 3 the information you learned in Unit 1 and Unit 2. So, for example, in Unit 1, the whole issue of worldview, and in Unit 2, Brothenbrenner's ecological model for analyzing. And that's the whole purpose of doing education ethics as a separate course, that you actually learn to think and think comprehensively. To think comprehensively, that you don't come up with just a superficial analysis, because if you just do a superficial analysis of the problem, you actually aggravate the problem. It's the kind of thinking that often government has done. They say there's X problem, and then we just try and respond with an X response. I remember back when I first started teaching, there were problems of deployment of teachers, and Bengu, the Minister of Education at the time, said, let's just shift teachers around. And it was a disaster, as if you could treat teachers like little pieces on a chessboard. And he said, well, we're lacking teachers in Transkei, so they relocated a teacher to the Transkei. And that education minister should have looked at Brothenbrenner's ecological model, because he would have realized this so-called teacher is married to someone with children in Cape Town. They're not going to move to the Transkei. And they paid them out, and it was a bit of a shambles. And I think that's where deeper thinking, ethical thinking, using these models, looking at the whole ecological system, looking at worldviews, when you take that all into account, when you come across a problem in education, you're more likely to have a reasoned response that is going to be more effective. Nothing's going to be perfect, but you've got a better chance of that. Let's go have a look at some more headlines, which I've just taken off a website that is from 2014. You can see here. Okay, so where have all the teachers gone? Parents have shut down an Eastern Cape school as the department cannot supply the teachers needed. Pupils receive counseling after a teacher's porn slip-up. Eden Glen High School life orientation teacher was unaware that his laptop was connected to the class projector. Court orders Limpopo to deliver textbooks. Judge Neil Tuchton said the education department had failed learners by not ensuring the timeliest delivery of textbooks. South Africa last in maths and science. The quality of South Africa's maths and science education places it last out of 148 countries, according to a World Economic Forum report. And now the education department slams the WEF report. The basic education department slammed the report by the World Economic Forum on the quality of education in South Africa. And I think that's an interesting headline. I think often government and people in authority are in denial, because to actually admit that there's a problem, is kind of like losing face, and it's a shameful thing. And I think that's one of the problems, and that's to do with worldview. Depending on different worldviews, to actually admit that you're weak is such a crisis in your worldview. It's like it's destructive to your identity. And so these are the issues that we're dealing with, different cultures and different ideas of honesty and guilt and shame and honesty and dealing with things. So I think that is one of the big problems there, of the denial and not facing up to it, because we don't want to lose face. Let's look at just two more things from the same website. Okay, again, this is quite a shocking little report. A 15-year-old schoolboy killed a fellow pupil, believed to have been his friend over a fight about a pencil during the second lunch break. Donald Molefe died at the school after being stabbed several times in the chest with a pocket knife. The Times newspaper reported that Molefe's death was filmed on cell phones by his friends and was being circulated on YouTube. According to Molefe's principal, children were searched for weapons at the school gates prior to classes commencing. And then, still in October, the Western Cape High Court found a dance teacher guilty of raping 7 young girls. Lawrence Gagu, 49, was also found guilty of 1 count of sexual grooming and 3 of exposing young girls to pornography. I'm not going to read on, but you can see that where in Finland they'll be discussing issues of phoning the textbook publishers and improving the textbook, and in South Africa it's a question of fighting for survival. It's not a question of ordering a second smart board. It's a question of actually, are children safe? Can we send them to what in some schools have become war zones? So we can see that the challenges are phenomenal in this area. So here's a question for you that you can think about, and you'll have a chance to answer it in your unit. What is your perception and experience of the state of education in South Africa? So that's an important point. Often we want to just look at things abstractly, but we need to think of where we are personally involved. And in this unit, there's lots of opportunity to share your point of view, lots of similar questions to what we're doing in this TUT. So it'd be really good to share your views. And I think we can't just approach this abstractly, because it's not just about abstract information, it's about commitment and motivation and hope. And that comes from starting from where you personally are in that. We're going to now go on to the second section. The first section was looking at the socio-economic issues and the crises and the crime, poverty, and that is one of the huge issues that we deal with in this unit. And one of the big other issues is pluralism and diversity, as we can see. So this connects very much with the material that you did in Unit 1. You can see especially that video clip Os Guinness, where he talks about a world safe for diversity. And he looks at the three options and proposes the middle option. So if you didn't have a look at that video, I would really recommend that you look at that. And I've included it again in this unit. And this is reading 2. And reading 2 is individualism, diversity, and unity. Goals, intention. And this is the question that I'd ask for you to think about. Comment on the title of the reading: individualism, diversity, and unity. And I'm just going to give you just a moment to think about that. And you're welcome to comment if you'd like. But I think we can see this is the problem, because individualism is very much the spirit of the age. Everyone has the right to be their own person and do their own thing. And at the same time, the problem is exacerbated because there's so much diversity. So you have so many individuals all striving to do their own thing. And yet, we still seek unity, at least on 2 bases. Number one, we seek unity for society to function. For society to function, you need people to work together as teams. So there's immediate tension between the individualism and the diversity and the need for teamwork. But it's not just a logistical thing for effective functioning. We also somehow have some sort of moral or ethos ideal of being unified. That somehow, we see it in the literature. We say no man is an island, and we need each other, and a constant Ubuntu. So we can see that there is really a need to balance individualism, diversity, and unity. And that is a real challenge because they are, in some ways, mutually exclusive. And there's a real struggle between the two. And then we're going to look at reading 3. Okay, I'm just going to look at reading 3. And this is now another big section. So there have been 3 big sections in this unit. The first section was on the socioeconomic problems and we looked at those 2 video clips, and we can see how great the problems are. The second section that we looked at had to do with pluralism and diversity and individualism and the goals of unity. And this is the third section the major section that is covered in this unity, the whole issue of culture and contextualization. And this is the issue of looking at the African culture versus Western culture. And there's talk of the African Renaissance, and there's talk about the need for models of education and cultural models that are authentically African. And there's, again, a tension between that has to be explored. So that's all I have now to cover in this unit. So I hope you enjoy this unit. I think it's a very important unit that is really going to help equip you for your role as educators. And my encouragement is to realize that teaching is an excellent calling profession. I really believe it's one of the most important ones, where you can make such a deep difference. And I think this is an amazing country to be in. And even though the problems are so great, the impact we can have it can be even greater. And I think by really engaging with this material, you'll be equipped to think and understand in a deeper way and come up with better solutions. So I hope you enjoy this module. And if you have any questions or queries, just contact me on Funda, and I look forward to seeing you in the next chat. Thanks.